Are you ready? Hey! Are you ready? Are you ready for the
Jive turkeys. What it do, Jive turkeys? Welcome back to the Controversy. I'm your host, Ian Elliott-Carter. I see you laughing. So on the show today, we have my good friend Alex Snow. He is just not used to me saying what it do, Jive turkeys.
Oh, no, I just love all your little catchphrases that you have.
Yeah, it can be robotic at times, but my audience, they're a bunch of Jive turkeys. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us on the show, big homie. And yeah,
I appreciate you inviting me back, man.
Oh, for sure. We're gonna have more of those in the future. But you, my friend, are a Fresh Prince of Bel-Air fan. Is that correct?
Oh, for sure. Like, I guess I didn't realize until I watched the reunion, like, how big of an impact it had on my childhood. Because, like, it took me back to, like, 7, 8 years old when I was right there in the thick of it. So.
Absolutely. On my last live stream, I was actually asked, one's got to go, Martin or Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and I was like, hands down, Martin. I love Martin. It's a funny show, but this one had better values. It had it touched my soul a little bit more. I could relate a little bit to these characters. It felt like I grew up with them, kind of like what you were saying at that age.
Well, and like, Martin was a great show, and it was groundbreaking in its own way, but like, you look at the cultural appeal across like so many demographics that the Fresh Prince had.
Oh, for sure.
And like you said, like, we grew up with that show. Like, I didn't realize Tatiana Ali, I didn't realize she was so much older than I am. Like, she's like 9 years older than me. But she was like 11 when that show started, and I remember growing up with her on that.
Yeah, we were basically like, that was kind of. I always thought I was her age as well too, but she looks good for her age, like you said. But like, she didn't look 11 years old. She kind of looked like she was 10. I mean, not 10, 8, 7, something like that, you know. But she's a great actress. She's an amazing actress. All of them.
And like right now, she's 42, I guess, and there's no way that she looks 42.
Boy, there's some people that we know that are not even close to that look over 42.
I was gonna say, we know some people that are 22 that look about 52.
Absolutely, stay off of drugs, everybody. So in this reunion, they touched on a lot of things. They touched on the auditions, the beginnings, the ends. They had a tribute to Uncle Phil, aka James Avery. We had a conversation about the transitions between light skin and dark skin Aunt Viv, which we'll get into that. And there was also talking about healing with forgiveness when it came to a fallout with the original Aunt Viv, aka Janet Hubert. Let's talk about some of your reactions to the beginning auditions when you saw like the first recording of like Hillary or Will or even Carlton and stuff like that. What did you think?
So, like, for instance, the Hillary one, like, when they showed her audition, like, she was zeroed in. Like, she was Hillary from the audition. And then you take, like, Carlton, even Alfonso Ribeiro was like, I showed up to this audition in a tracksuit. Like, there's no way I should have gotten this part. But, I mean, both of them, like, they were hilarious, and you could tell from the audition. Like, they were meant to play these characters.
Yeah, he was absolutely right. If I was one of the people like in charge of casting, I probably would not have picked Alfonso, and I would have been 100% wrong because who could do that character? That's him.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was really cool. But somebody in that audition room saw something that we eventually saw in the future, and thank God for them. Seriously.
Well, and then you take like Will Smith's story about his quote unquote audition.
Yeah.
He's like, I was at a birthday party, and Quincy Jones was like, you got 10 minutes, go. In front of everybody that needed to sign off on the show.
Hey, that's life sometimes. You know, that Eminem said it perfectly. You only get one shot. And sometimes pressure puts a lot of creativity in people.
Oh, for sure.
And I think that was Go ahead.
What's crazy is, like, thinking Will Smith was saying, like, he had never acted in any, like, real way before. And thinking how even from the pilot episode, like, he was that character. And so to think that he had never acted before that is wild to me.
Yeah, and they did show kind of an evolution of him not being able to act. A lot of people were kind of getting frustrated in the beginning, and he memorized everybody's lines, and you could see him mouthing them in the background. But for him to start off...
that's one of my favorite points, is where they're talking about, like, he's mimicking or he's mouthing everybody's lines because he didn't know his own cues and whatnot. So
that's cute. It is. To see someone, like, at that, when you're rewatching that, to see Will Smith struggling and, of course, not getting it down in the beginning. But then 2020, in the conversation of one of the best actors of our generation.
Oh, for sure.
That's insane that we've witnessed that evolution. For him to be like a rapper from Philly to be like up there with Denzel Washington and Leonardo DiCaprio and stuff like that. Sorry, Leo, I didn't mean to fumble your name like that.
He's going to come after you now.
Yep.
But to see him go from like the pilot of Fresh Prince to this like super emotional movie, and 8 Pounds is a great example too. Or like The Pursuit of Happiness.
Yep.
Yeah, all of those kind of roles, to see him come out of the Fresh Prince is phenomenal to be able to see. So
for sure, man. And you never know what type of talent you got in front of you, man. It's always good to give people a chance. And let's talk about some of the other beginnings. We saw Jeffrey. We saw the fact that they acknowledge that sometimes they break the fourth wall in the show. I've always appreciated that. Was some unspoken thing that everybody loved, but the fact that they acknowledged that, like, hey, we're just. Not only is this a show at heart, but we're having fun. We're a family, and we want everybody to acknowledge that this is just a show for laughs and goofs and stuff like that.
Oh, for sure. And what's funny about that is, like, I remember watching this show as a kid and, like, not even putting together that they were breaking the fourth wall. It really wasn't until I rewatched I watched the reunion, how many times they did that, including the scene where like Carlton freaks out and runs around.
Yeah.
Like that, even stuff like that is, like Will said, it was a huge no-no for shows like that to do that, and they just kind of threw caution to the wind and said, we're gonna do what we want.
And I think the show showed, like, people, there's a lot of you hear a lot of things in television shows where some of the cast members don't get along, or there's always some disputes behind the scenes with production or writing and stuff like that. But it generally did seem like that was a great atmosphere to not only work on, but just to be in the audience to see.
Oh, for sure.
Not saying it was above any drama, which we will talk about in a little bit.
Oh yeah, we'll get into that.
For sure. But did you get a little bit emotional before you even talk about the Uncle Phil stuff? But did you get emotional when they were talking about some of the endings of like the last readings and the last episodes how it was ending? What were your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that's a testament to the series itself. That, I mean, I don't remember what year it actually went off the air, but you got, well, let's see,
95 or 96
went off the air like 22 years ago,
something like that. Yeah.
So the fact that those people are still that close, and like you look at, like, especially Will Smith and Alfonso Ribeira, who every time they're anywhere together, like, it's just like they pick up where they left off.
Oh yeah.
And so I can only imagine, with as close as that cast was, what that like last week of filming was like. Because
sure.
I mean, I'm sure, again, like you put people in those kind of situations, and they really do become a family. So it just, you can see it, the emotion in all of them when they're talking about it. Like every one of them was tearing up. Even like Jazzy Jeff was tearing up about it. So.
I never would have thought. Like, I don't think Jazzy's a gangster type of person, but he doesn't look like a person that's easily broken. And he was tearing up all to this reunion.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. Like. And like one of the moments he teared up is like after they did the James Avery. After they honored him, like they cut to Jazzy Jeff, and you could see, like, he's always got those glasses on, but you could see like the tears coming down his cheek, which is to me is a testament to not only that show, but like even James Avery as a pivotal character in that show as a whole. So.
And in their personal lives as well. A lot of things that they were the testimony of what they. The behind the scenes stuff of what their friendships and stuff like that. Before we talk about the James Avery stuff though, who was your favorite character growing up?
I mean, Will Smith, let's be honest. Like, I don't know. I just liked the fact that he just was super goofy, but even in that show, he could alternate between being like absolutely ridiculous and being super dramatic and deep, all within the span of like 2 or 3 minutes.
Oh, for sure.
Like, I always go back to that episode that is probably one of the most iconic ones is the one about his dad.
Right.
And you see, like, even within that scene with him and Uncle Phil, like, the variations between how he's joking around and he's acting super macho and tough and whatnot to completely breaking down inside of a minute and a half is, I loved Will Smith because of the range that he had in that show.
And absolutely, and he's very relatable. And I'm going to have the same answer. Will Smith. Carlton's obviously a close second, but I could definitely relate to him more. Like, Will always puts on his goofy front, and he's a very comedic person, but sometimes that is something that he's suppressing. This show is deeper than a lot of people give it credit for.
Oh yeah, for sure.
For sure. It's definitely a funny show, but like you could tell sometimes he does get the jokes out there to avoid conflict or avoid any emotional things going on in his life, and that's why I like them a lot as well.
Absolutely. Well, and like you said, like the show is not only a lot deeper, the show was it was so relevant to that period, and even Will Smith makes a comment about this, about how relevant it still is. Like, again, watching it as a young white kid, like, I didn't really understand, like, the scene where they're getting pulled over by the cops and Will's like, keep your hands on the steering wheel, or like where they're getting arrested and Uncle Phil's going in there to bail them out, or even like the scene with in the pool hall where they're getting hustled. Like, I didn't put all of that together because that obviously is not the background that I came from.
Right.
But to watch that now as an adult, I'm like, this is super forward thinking while still being super relevant to the time. So
it's
and
definitely.
I think that speaks to why 30 years later people are still they love and they just devour this show.
Yeah, and it was said on in the reunion too. Like, some people said this was their show growing up, and then they're saying also now it's my kid's favorite show.
Exactly.
My son has binge watched the show on HBO Max. That's one reason we got it, and that's the same testimony I have. Seriously.
Oh, for sure.
And one of my favorite shows is episodes as well. I wish they kind of would have touched on this. Is that episode where Carlton and Will were about to join a frat. And they wanted Will because he was black enough, he was hip, he was the cool guy, and they thought that Carlton was a sellout and stuff like that because he grew up rich. But there was a great lesson in that. Like, look, Uncle Phil worked his ass off to get to where he was, to give his people, his family what they need, and now they're sellouts just because they're being successful in life. That was a very good emotional episode as well.
Well, and that was one of the, I mean, I know we'll touch on the Aunt Viv's, but that was one of the things, like, even watching the reunion, you see OG Aunt Viv was, to me, in a lot of ways, a very different character.
Thanks.
Because she had that, I don't know how to say this without, like, sounding crude, but, like, when it came time to confront somebody messing with their family, like, she's taking her earrings off. Like, even that scene where the Carlton and Will had gotten arrested. Like, I think it's a beautiful moment with Uncle Phil where he's talking to Will about that. And he's like, no, I came from the streets. I raised myself up to this position. And like OG Aunt Viv was the same way. Like, she brought a level of humanity to that role that I think the second Aunt Viv did really well, but there's definitely a different dynamic there between the two of them.
Absolutely. And let's get on the Aunt Viv conversation. We'll go to Uncle Phil right after this because we're on Viv. But I'd like to say, growing up as a kid, I always thought light-skinned Aunt Viv was better because she reminded me of my mom. She seemed like a more someone that cared a lot more about their family, and they were just the one that cooked and the one that was there to hug you and stuff like that. But as an adult, though, I did change my mind after rewatching it. I was like, yo, the original OG Aunt Viv is a really cool person that you would want to hang out with. She's like the cool mom that goes out there and plays with you and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and
sure.
the dancing episode is iconic, and her singing and dancing. She's just an all-around like powerhouse of energy and talent. But yeah, let's talk about the fallouts when it came to that. There was it's an elephant in a room. It's a joke. It's an ongoing meme that 1 minute that she's dark skinned and she's light skinned, and then they just didn't really address it. They just kept it moving on the show. They had one little gag about it, but other than that, It's like now the role of Aunt Viv is this light skinned lady, which she was awesome too. No hate on her. She wasn't terrible. It's just they're two different people. But yeah, they did touch upon why there was a fallout, and they did touch upon the things that were going on personally in her life. Like Will was a little young immature and young, and she had some personal things going on in her lives. What was your reaction to that? Because this is the part that really got me choked up a little bit.
Well, and like I think back when I was a kid watching that show, like I don't know if I'd maybe been conditioned by like Boy Meets World, because you look at like Topanga's parents, and pretty much every time they're on screen, they're a different actor.
Right.
So I don't know.
Good point.
I don't know if I ever like really took into consideration that like I knew it was two different actresses, but I just thought it was probably maybe like this person didn't want to work here anymore.
Yeah.
And then as I grew up, I found out about like, okay, the reason that she wasn't on the show really stemmed from like the issues that her and Will Smith had against each other. And like you said, it comes from the fact that Will was 21 years old and the centerpiece of this monumental show. And then you have this woman who had all of this stuff going on in the background that really she didn't tell any of her castmates about. Because like even when Will Smith is explaining like the conversation they had and what they talked about, you can see it in all of their eyes. Like they had no idea that she was in marriage and like that all of this stuff was happening. So like my reaction to that was I remember seeing in the trailer for this that they were going to address the two different Aunt Vivs. And so I still really wasn't like sure what to expect, but seeing like all of the backstory of why there was a different Aunt Viv and why, like hearing that Will Smith and her hadn't talked in 27 years just blows my mind.
It's crazy.
Because I mean, like Hollywood is a small world. Like you're gonna cross paths with people from friends that I know that live out there and whatnot.
Yeah. Did it blow your mind too that the two Aunt Vivs never met either? That one.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, I had never thought about that either. Like that's crazy to me.
Yeah.
And like I had never put into perspective that like when Janet, who was OG Aunt Viv, was gone, like she was gone. Like they didn't bring her back for the finale or nothing. Like they never even referenced that she was on the show. Moving like forward from that. So getting to see her and Will Smith have that reconciliation on screen, like I'll be honest, if I haven't talked to someone in 27 years, I'm not entirely sure that I'm gonna let you film me talking to them for the first time.
Yeah, that was a real moment. I think I understood why they did that. That seemed like a conversation that did seem that it should have been private, but a lot of the stuff was public, so I can understand why they did it publicly. So I get it. I get both sides to possibly that argument.
And like when I was thinking about it, like I can see why they filmed it, because I mean one of the most beautiful moments in the reunion is seeing them like work it out right there in real time, like and you see them like bury that hatchet right there, and you could tell it wasn't like faked or like staged or anything, like because she looks him in the eye and she's like, I want to know why. Like, why did you basically get me kicked off this show?
Right.
And so seeing them talk it out, again, one of the most beautiful moments of the entire special for me.
Big facts. And I think that was why it made me very emotional, because you could tell it was genuine. There's sometimes when you watch the reunions or just like things on television, sometimes it takes away from the terrible at words sometimes. It takes away from the genuine conversations. You could tell sometimes it is for the camera. You could tell the pain in her eyes. You could tell that, you know, she had a lot that she was holding on her shoulders for years and years and years, and it was releasing at the moment as she was speaking. And that was very therapeutic, not just for her, but for him as well. And for him to acknowledge like some of the things that he could have done, that he did to make her her part on the show a little bit more difficult during her rough time, because he had no idea. I was on that camp of like, man, OG Aunt Viv might be a terrible person to work with just because of the reception that the media has portrayed her as. Like,
oh, for sure.
A lot of people like Carl, even James Avery, no, not James Avery, but What's Carlton's real name in real life? Sorry.
Alfonso.
Even Alfonso has publicly spoken about how she was difficult, and a lot of people that had ties to when they were working with her have said that. So I always had this perception like maybe she was difficult. Maybe there was a good reason for her to be kicked off the show. But when she said like, I was in an abusive relationship, I was with child, we're men, we don't understand that, we just so whenever she was real about that situation, I was like, man, I even felt bad for even having these thoughts of like, why was I prejudging somebody? First of all, I'm just a fan. I should never we don't know what's going on in these people's lives. And I think it was important, and I was glad that she did publicly say like, look, the media tore me up, Hollywood has blacklisted me, she doesn't have anything to lose, let me just tell you what it really was.
Well, and like her, one of the comments that she made that really stuck out to me is that when she told Will Smith, like, you publicly called me a difficult woman to work with, which in Hollywood in the early 90s, especially a dark-skinned black woman, is the kiss of death. Like, and so no one wanted to work with her after that. And I'll be honest, like, I could probably IMDb this, but I can't think of anything notable that she was in after Fresh Prince.
I remember one thing. She was on an episode of the Jamie Foxx show. And she was basically, that's the only thing I remember. And that was like a couple years after the Fresh Prince. So it wasn't even like, it's still far away, from 2020.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like, I remember when I was watching that, like, especially when she said, like, she didn't talk to anybody on the cast or like the production team because she didn't know like who she could trust. I know my first thought was like, well, if this was such a family, like, why didn't you feel like you could trust anybody? But then, like, when you start to peel back the layers of like the mental health side of that, like, obviously everything that comes back to mental health with me is that you've got a woman who's in an abusive relationship. She's going through pregnancy, and obviously, again, as a guy, I don't know what that is like, but I know like your hormones are all over the place, and like you're feeling like everything is elevated to where it would normally be if you weren't pregnant. And then you add into the fact that she's in an abusive relationship. And I can only imagine like the pressure that she was under because, again, this show was revolutionary. Like it was unlike any show before that. So having to juggle all of those balls and still like maintain some kind of decorum, like I can only imagine where I would be in that. And so I hate it on the backside looking back at it that like you have people like Alfonso Ribeira and even James Avery had a quote about like he had to put her in check more than once. And I feel bad for her, and like my heart breaks for her that she was going through all of that and didn't feel like she had anyone she could turn to. Yeah. And like you do when you're not in a great mental state, is you start burning bridges. And so
for sure. And she went on a lot of tours dissing them as well in the past, but I love the fact that she was one of the first people to say, look, I apologize, I was just not in a good space. And that's great, when you're wrong on both sides, because both of them both acknowledge that they were wrong in their own ways.
Absolutely.
It's the best part of healing, just acknowledging where it is and see where we can go from there. But he could not do this without her, and I'm happy that he reached out and did that.
Well, and that was another one of my favorite parts about that segment specifically, is where he was like, I can't have a reunion and not address like you were a fundamental, like foundational part of this show.
He's right.
And the fact that he's like, I spend so much of my life now trying to be inspirational and talking about relationships and all of these things. And I've got this elephant in the room that I've had there for 27 years that I haven't dealt with. So it's just like on both sides, it was just so good to see like two people being able to say, hey, I screwed up. And Will Smith being able to say, like, I was 21. I was not mature enough to be handling some of the things that I was handling. And especially that relationship was one of the things he dropped the ball on.
That's real, man. That's real. Will's having a heck of a year, man. He's got some ups and downs. He's entangled, but it seems like he's untangled. So proud of him for that, man. Let's close right now and just talk about James Avery, a.k.a. Uncle Phil, man. That was an emotional time too, bro.
I mean, I feel like that's probably the perfect way to end this because, I mean, there's a very good chance that I'll probably just start crying right here on the screen. Like, the thing that broke me, like the thing that opened the floodgates for me, is like when Will starts talking about that episode. Like when everybody thinks about Fresh Prince, they always go back to that scene at the very end of that episode with his dad, where he's like, "Why didn't he want me?" And like, I'm getting chills even just talking about it now, because like one of the reasons that hit me so hard is because, I mean, you and I have talked about like my relationship with my dad not being great, like him kind of coming in and out of my life. And so seeing the way that James Avery immediately like steps into that father role for him in that scene, and even like above and beyond that, like another one of my favorite moments is Will is talking about like when they were doing the live recording and he flubbed a line and he just like starts screaming, and James Avery like checks him right there. He says, "No, use me, get it together." And then he calls action, and that scene that was in the episode was the scene directly after that, or the take that was directly after that. So like, again, just seeing the way that he was kind of the pillar of that, and even holding Will Smith to a higher standard, because again, another one of my favorite interactions is where Will talks about like, he pulled me aside and said, "No, you're the future. Like, you are the culture. Like, you're the thing that people are going to look back and watch. So you have to hold yourself and you have to carry yourself in such a way that that's a positive thing and not a negative thing."
Oh, for sure. And that's very well said, Alex. And I enjoyed like them explaining, not only was he a great father figure / uncle on the show in their personal lives, you know, Ashley said some things of like him being a mentor to her, and Jazzy Jeff as well. They talked music for a while as well. And you could tell he's just a very humble person on and off screen. And we look at him as well, like me and you. I didn't have my father in my life. You didn't as well. It sucks. It's like Cable Guy. We looked at these people sometimes for the guidance, but it's fair to say that he was a good father figure to look up to when it comes to the Black Mirror.
Absolutely. And that, I think, in a lot of ways, that was one of the hardest things about watching the reunion. And I can only imagine for them that it was hard not being able to have him there and have him talk about his experiences on the show. Because again, I have to say, like, even though Will Smith was my favorite character on the show, probably the one I look back on the most fondly is Uncle Phil, because he was the meat and the heart and the wisdom of that show. And so like every moment that I think back, that like I'm like, that was a really deep moment, generally has Uncle Phil involved in it. And so again, just the way that even he carried himself on and off the screen, and the way that every single person in that room said like, "No, he mentored me. He helped me grow as a person." Like, again, Tatiana Ali saying like, I learned how to be an actress at his feet, and learned how to carry myself as a Black person in this industry at his feet. And so it just, again, I think it speaks volumes to who he was and the effect that he had as a person.
Absolutely, man. Rest in peace, James Avery, man. Alex, I appreciate you coming on this show and talking about this, because you were one of the first people I thought about, because I knew you enjoyed this show as well, and I wanted to do some more collaborations with you, man. So everybody, this is Alex Snow. Get used to his face. He's going to be a family member of the Controversy. Did you want to plug anything, brother?
No, I mean, I've got, if you guys want to know like what I'm doing creatively, or like what I've got in the mix, go to Instagram. It's Alexander Snow Creative. That's kind of my hub for what I'm doing podcast wise, poetry, everything I do creatively is going to kind of start stemming out of that. So if you want to follow that, that's a good way to kind of keep your finger on what I'm involved in.
Absolutely, man. He's got some good stuff on there. He's been writing for years. So, like, even if you go there for the first time, you can scroll down and look at stuff from, like, 2016 and stuff. You would probably enjoy it. But, yeah, what did you guys think of the reunion episode? Were you happy to see it? Are you happy to see the beef squash between Will Smith and dark-skinned Aunt Viv? This is a crazy year for me. I mean, Gucci Mane and Jeezy squashed the beef last night as well. Who knows? 50 might kiss Ja Rule tomorrow. We don't know. 2020 is insane.
I was going to say, putting those two things on the same night, like the reunion from Fresh Prince and then that versus battle, that was brilliant. Like, I mean, I don't know.
Anything can happen, man. This year's not over.
Help keep your brother out the streets. Subscribe to my dad's YouTube channel. Love, peace, and chicken.